I'm ready.
Okay. Start, can you just tell us who you are?
Well, I'm Sam Beatty. I'm a native of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, now living in Birmingham. I served in World War II. I was a combat pilot and instructor pilot in the South Pacific, primarily Solomon Islands. When I returned to the States in, I think in July of 1944, I was assigned as an instructor in B25 type aircraft, and I did that primarily most of the time until I was separated from the service in 45 in July of 1945, and I got out of the service altogether. But when the Korean conflict came along, I got my commission restored, and I served really as a legal officer. I had to give up my aeronautical rating in order to become an Air Force lawyer. Well, I was getting a little old to fly, so I became a military lawyer, and I served in the reserve until I retired as a military lawyer.
You said you were born in Tuscaloosa. When were you born?
1923, April 23rd, 1923. I'm 84 years old, looking forward to my 85th birthday. After that, I don't know what comes.
Tell us a little about growing up in Tuscaloosa in the 20s and 30s. What was that like?
Tuscaloosa was a small town, small university town. I was fortunate in that I knew a great many people, particularly through my father, who was a businessman downtown. And, and though that was really most of the time, as I recall, during the Depression. People got along all right, but there was no cash money. There just wasn't any cash money. We didn't have allowances or things as children. Most of us had to sell magazines, deliver newspapers, work in grocery stores, drugstores. I've done all sorts of things to make money. But it was a quiet town. When I went to St. John's parochial school for 10 years, and then my parents transferred me to Tuscaloosa Senior High School, and I stayed there 2 years, graduated from Tuscaloosa High School. Then I went in I was really too young to go to the university. I was only 16, but I was just too young. But I was in and out at that time, and one of the so-called hobbies as a young person in Tuscaloosa, was to join the National Guard. They had 3 companies. They had a headquarters company, a rifle company, and a machine gun company, D company. And I lied about my age, as every other boy in Tuscaloosa would do, to get in the National Guard, because the National Guard paid you a little money. I mean, it was a source of a little income. And so I had about a year and a half of military experience, as well as ROTC training, before I actually went in the service. I was 18 when I went in the service. And
Tell us about how that happened.
how did that happen? Well, a group of boys were sitting in an automobile in front of the School of Commerce building at the university, and someone said, they're giving an Air Corps exam out at Van de Graaff Field today. Why don't we go out there and take it? Well, I said, sure, that's fine.
When was
So
this?
this was in 1941, and well, as a matter of fact, I think Pearl Harbor had just occurred. It had just occurred, and so we were talking about when we would go in the service. And so we went out, and the grade of 70 was passing. I made 70. How I did it, I don't know, but I made 70. Some of the boys I had grown up with didn't make 70, and they had to wait and be drafted. But I got a delay en route, and I was called up to active duty in March of 1942. Actually, I went through pilot training at a number of bases in the United States, and then I graduated December the 10th, 1942. That was the Pearl Harbor anniversary class that I was in. I graduated from Ellington Field, Texas, where I had been sent to a multi-engine training school.
Let's start from the beginning of your training. When you left Tuscaloosa, where'd you go?
When I left Tuscaloosa, I went to Kelly Field, Texas. They called it Tent City, Texas. As a matter of fact, I got mail addressed to Sam Beatty, Tent City, Texas, and they were able to deliver it. And that was the classification center. You took a series of tests for 2 weeks. You know, these computer tests where you fill in between the vertical lines, and we took those all day long, Monday through Friday, for 2 weeks. And somehow the psychologists had been able to determine from these tests whether you would qualify as a pilot, a navigator, or bombardier. I just happened by chance. I qualified for all three, and if you qualified for pilot, they sent you to pilot school. So then I went from there.
This was based purely on a psychological test?
Yeah. Well, they sent us up to there's a big base in Texas now called Lackland Air Force Base. Well, we were the first class to go up there. It was the pilot replacement center where we had ground school, physical training, workouts all the time. They ran us to death. Did that for a number of weeks. And then I was sent to Parks Air College, East St. Louis, Illinois. It was one of the premier primary schools in the country, and I was fortunate enough to go there. And as I recall, the session was about 9 weeks, or 9 to 11 weeks of primary training. We got our first flying in the airplanes. You know, I didn't know anything about airplanes, but you had to learn to fly, or you didn't survive.
So what was your first contact with an actual airplane?
You mean in primary? Well, I had a very tough instructor. And he told me to I got in the rear seat. It was a tandem plane. And I got up, and he took off, and he said, "You've got this controlled." Well, I didn't know what to do. And he says, "Now cut the throttle." Well, I pulled the throttle back, and I was just going straight, just descending. And there was an oak tree in the middle of this tremendous cornfield over there on the east side of the Mississippi River, where we flew. And I didn't know any better. I was just headed for there. I was waiting for him to tell me what to do. And so he said to me in very colorful language, "Are you going to just run into the tree?" Well, then I knew what to do. But that was my first experience.
What kind of aircraft?
That was a PT-19A. I've forgotten all. It was a twin. It was a single wing monoplane. You know, the ones they used in Tuscaloosa at one time when they trained pilots there, they were Stearmans. They were twin, had 2 wings, 2 biplane they call them. The Fairchild PT-19A was a monoplane, and it was a good little airplane, a really fine airplane. Well, I went from there to Enid, Oklahoma. Now, school at East St. Louis at Parks was a civilian school. Almost all of the instructors were civilians. But when you got to Enid, Oklahoma, that was strictly an Air Force, regular Air Force field. They trained, I don't know how many hundred people in what they call BT-13As. And they were also a tandem airplane, but had a lot more horsepower, a bigger airplane and all that. And that's where we learned navigation, night flying, formation flying, acrobatics, things of that kind. I remember while we were doing all this flying, we were also going to ground school, and we had to do physical training a lot, you know, and they ran it on the West Point system. If you were an underclassman, You sat on the first 4 inches of your chair at all meals, and you marched back and forth in formation. And you never looked anywhere at the table. You looked straight at the person in front of you. When you were an advanced student, you didn't have to do that. You had some privileges, you know. It was we called Enid, we had a nickname for it. We called it Enid Awful, Oklahoma. And it was awful because it was tough. They really did work us pretty hard. Then I went from there to Ellington Field, Texas. It's just south of Houston. And there was very little structural discipline. I mean, we had a job to do. It was more relaxed. Our meals, we took our meals informally. And the best instructor I ever had was there at Ellington Field, a really nice guy.
What were you flying there?
His name was, you asked me now, I can't remember. You know, I'm 84 years old, I don't remember that.
What kind of planes were you flying?
We were flying a plane called AT-9, made by the Curtiss Company, a beautiful airplane, a small, narrow wing loading, twin engine, and a very fine airplane. We were using that airplane because they were training us for B-26 type aircraft, which were a much larger version of the AT-9. But I really loved that airplane, and I had a.
How did you get on that B-26 path? What led you to the
Well, you know, the Army does a lot of things that you don't understand. The B-26 was the largest of the medium bombers. The B-25 was a little smaller, didn't have quite as much horsepower, couldn't carry as many bombs and that like that. So we were all destined for the B-26. As it turned out, when we graduated, we were all on orders to go to Shreveport, Barksdale Field, Louisiana at Shreveport. But at the last minute, they changed the orders, and half the people on orders went to Barksdale, and the other half that I was in went to Greenville, South Carolina to train in B-25 aircraft. They were sending B-25s by that time to North Africa and to the South Pacific. And they were trying to build up the South Pacific forces. The war really hadn't gotten going, you know, such a big way at that time. When I went over, I landed at Honolulu, Hickam Field, Hawaii on May 1st, May Day, 1943. We flew across, we took a B-25, my crew and I took a B-25 clear across the Pacific to the Fiji Islands, where we were stopped and part of what they call the 70th Bomb Squadron, 70th Medium Bomb Squadron.
Can we back up just a minute and tell me a little more about Greenville, your training?
Oh, Greenville? When I think of cold weather, I think of Greenville. That was the coldest winter they had had in years and years. It had snow and all of that. It was a big field, lots of long runways and that sort of thing. And they divided us into squadrons, training squadrons. And we did an awful lot of what's called transition flying, learning how to fly the B-25, a lot of night flying, a lot more formation flying, and gunnery. We'd go down to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and let the gunners, you know, shoot at targets and all of that. And Greenville really wasn't such tough duty that we flew a lot at night. At that time, I guess the Army thought we were going to do a lot of night fighting. And we would we would get in an airplane, let's say at 7 o'clock in the evening, and fly all night. We'd fly from Greenville to Tampa, Florida, to New Orleans, to someplace, to Myrtle Beach or someplace. And we'd fly all night and land. We'd land about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning back at Greenville. We did that frequently. And what you're doing is you're just sitting up there. And remember, this is in the wintertime. And we're dressed in all these fleece-lined flying clothes with heavy boots and fleece-lined caps and all of that stuff. And you just sit up there in the cockpit and freeze to death. There were no heaters in the airplane. And you just sit up there and freeze and go from point to point. And every now and then you'd get on the radio and file a position report to someplace, you know. It was somewhat hazardous duty in the sense that we were flying around the mountains a lot up there. And you had to be very careful how you landed, where you landed. I almost landed one night on the roof of a cotton mill.
How'd that happen?
Well, at that time, they hadn't learned enough to have blinking lights everywhere. So you had these steady lights. Well, I was in the area of the air base, and here was a line of lights, parallel lights, just like the runway. So I called in for landing instructions. I got landing instructions, turned around, got on my base leg, put the wheels down, and I peeled off. And instead of going on the runway, which was way over there, I was headed to a roof of a cotton mill. Because I realized what it was. It didn't take me long to realize I was in the wrong place. I just went around and landed. But that was one of the risks. We lost people not infrequently around that area. People would take off, an instructor and a couple of students, and just never show up. And every now and then I read in the paper, well, they'll find an old B-25 somewhere up in those mountains. You know, it was kind of that way. It was that.
What was a B-25 like?
It was, I've got a great picture of one. It's upstairs. I've got a great picture of one. It was made by the North American Aviation Company, twin engine, sort of an oval-shaped fuselage, good size wing, a very good airplane, very rugged airplane, and a very easy airplane to fly. When I was overseas, I was assigned an airplane I named the Sweet Pea. It had Sweet Pea on it because my then girl, I called her Sweet Pea. And it was slightly warped. The airplane was just slightly warped. And so it flew not quite straight level. It flew a little bit at an angle, but I loved it. The engines were wonderful, and I knew they'd get me there and back. It was a great airplane.
How large a crew did a B-25?
Started out with 6. You had a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, engineer, and a gunner. When we got overseas, of course, they realized that was too many, so they trained the navigators in bombardiering and the bombardiers into navigation. So they just combined those two. And sometimes we would only fly with maybe 4 people. We'd have a turret gunner, pilot, co-pilot, and maybe navigator, bombardier. I've flown it with just my engineer sometimes. If I had to go somewhere and do something, if just the 2 of us fly it down. It would, actually, for the work we did with it, it was obsolescent. It was too slow. We did a lot of low-level attacks. And you know how people shoot doves and quail? Well, hitting a B-25 in that way was just like shooting a dove. You know, we'd only fly maybe 20 feet above the ground lots of times, skip bombing and that kind of activity. And the 25, we'd go over targets maybe 190 miles an hour. Cruising, we would usually cruise them about 175 to 80. The red line is a maximum that you could run the engine at was around 210. But you couldn't run them very long. They'd overheat badly. So you couldn't run them at the red line very often. I've been over some targets I had the red line on as long as I could, you know. But it was a good airplane nevertheless. They didn't use B-26s over there. When I first joined the 70th Squadron, they had the old B-26Bs that had participated in the Battle of Midway, and then they'd flown them down to Fiji. And I was checked out in 26s then, but they began to bring 25s over and discarded the B-26. It's like The B-17, the Flying Fortress, was a great airplane. It was obsolescent. It was just too slow. And so they started off in the Pacific with B-17s, but they phased them out and brought in B-24s, which is a bigger airplane, carried more bombs, and all of that. It was a good airplane.
When you finished your training, did you know where you'd be going?
Well, no, I did not. Sometime during the time we were in advanced training, the Air Corps sent out a list of preferences, what you wanted to fly and so on. Well, I chose P-38s. Of course, I didn't get a lot of people chose P-38s and this and that, but I ended up in B-25s. When I was at Greenville, we really didn't know where we were going. We were either going to North Africa or the Pacific somewhere, but we didn't know where. And of course, I don't know whether the planning was really that far advanced to determine, where everybody was going to go. The war was progressing and beginning, and I think the strategists were having some. Well, I know that the Navy and the Army, were at war about who was going to get what and how much and where. And but finally, we received orders. I had to go from Greenville on a bus to Savannah Army Air Base, and pick up a B-25 and fly it to the West Coast. When I got to the West Coast, I was at a base called Long Beach Army Airfield. And we flew load tests, what they call load tests. We would fly every other day up into the Nevada desert area and check out the instruments. And I know we had an automatic pilot, and the first one I flew with didn't work. All of a sudden, we're flying along straight and level, and the airplane goes down because the automatic pilot had jammed. So they replaced that. I never will forget it. Those things were made by a company named Smith and Heinz, somewhere in in Ohio, Indiana, someplace like that. And they weren't any good. Put another one in, we'd go up to load test, we'd be checking it out, bam. So they just took it out, and we hand flew the airplane all the way across the Pacific. But that's what we did. And there's a lot of water out in the Pacific. There's an awful lot of water. I flew from Hamilton.
Now, were you staying with your sister at some
Pardon me?
Were you staying with your sister at some point on the West Coast? I'm sorry.
Time for it.
Okay, well, we're ready to get back to it. Okay, what I'd like to do is go back to, you're in California, and you're waiting for your orders to go
Right.
overseas. Tell us a little about that period.
Well, we got out to Long Beach, and my sister Mary and her husband were living in Santa Monica, which is just up a little domestic railroad line from Long Beach. And so I knew my flight schedule. Every other day, I would have to go down and fly. And then when I got off in the afternoon, I'd ride the railroad up to their home, and they'd take me out to dinner or something. And I had the following day off, you see, so I had a little rest, and I could visit with them. And I did that for about 10 days. And of course, every day I'd leave with my little bag, I don't know whether I'm gonna come back or not. So I think after about 10 days, I went down, and we had shipping orders, and we flew the airplane up to San Rafael, California, just above San Francisco, Hamilton Field. And that's where we were going to fly out of. And I could not let them know anything, because they surmised that I didn't come back, I'd gone. Well, I did. They sent us, we took off at 9 o'clock one evening, soon after we got up there, and flew 2,300 miles to Hickam Field. And as a matter of fact, they were still a little bit edgy, even though it had been some time since the attack at Pearl Harbor. When you got over there, you had to made landfall at Oahu. You had to fly an identification circle, and if you didn't do that, they'd shoot at you. They'd alert. they'd alert somebody. Of course, we were careful about things like that. We landed there, and we stayed there only about 3 days, something like that, to get the airplane ready to go further down. My brother-in-law, Jim Shiley, and my sister Mary, who lived there in Santa Monica, had an old friend who was whom he had served with in the FBI in Washington. His name was Andrew Taylor, and they lived in Honolulu, up on the ridge that overlooked Pearl Harbor, all the area. And they had me out to dinner one night while I was there, and we went out on the yard, and they showed me where the attack had come from, and what all the airplanes and all going around, and said they stood out there that Sunday morning and watched the entire attack. Yeah, and just eyewitness. Just had a ringside seat of the whole attack. It gave me a chapter and verse about everything, that all the explosions and the sinking and all of that. And that was quite interesting to me. But anyway, I left there and I flew down to Christmas Island, which was the first hop was 12 hours and 30 minutes. The next hop was to Christmas Island, which is right out in the middle of nowhere. And that was a 9-hour flight. And on the way down there, I lost an oil pump. My oil pump wasn't working. So I had to wait there about 3 days for them to fly me an oil pump down, and got there. And then we went from there to a place called Canton Island. All of these little islands were on the very early Trans-Pacific route that Kingsford Smith and all those pioneers, had navigated. So we went to Canton Island, spent one night there, and then flew to Fiji. Now you can imagine a kid like me, a small town, undereducated kid who's read something about the South Seas and how idyllic they are and all that.
How old are you at the time?
What?
How old are you at this time?
Yeah. I was just trying to describe what the South Pacific Islands were really like. We're flying along, and here is Fiji is comprised of two main islands, Beatty WWII and Levu. Well, Beatty WWII was where we were headed, to a base called Nandi, which is now called Nadi or Nadi. They've changed the spelling, but it's Nandi, on the western side of the main island. And I looked down, I can remember how beautiful and lush it was, just beautiful. So when we landed and got off the airplane, you encountered this odor, a terrible odor. And it was a combination of all the rotting vegetation and the wood, the actual kind of wood that these Indians, whom the British had imported from India to work in the cane fields. And the Indians burned this particular type of wood. I don't know what gave it all this odor or anything, but it was awful. It was worse, a whole lot worse than the paper mill in Tuscaloosa, I can tell you that. But you had to get accustomed to it. Well, anyway, I stayed there. I was in the 70th Bomb Squadron then, and they were flying. All these guys in the 70th were just waiting to come home. They'd done their tours, and they were just waiting. But while they were there, they were flying submarine searches in the B-26s they had. So I flew with a couple of them on submarine searches. In fact, we came up on a wreckage. Japs had just sunk a ship out there, and we saw all the wreckage but no submarine. In fact, I lost two footlockers. Japanese sank by the ship that my lockers were on. So, but anyway, after about 3 weeks there, they transferred us to New Caledonia, which is a French, Vichy French island west of the Fijis, between Fiji and Australia. And we were stationed at a base called PDG, Now, I don't know how to pronounce it in French. It's Plains de Gaillac, but we called it Plains de Gaillac. But that, that's American. And so I stayed there. I was assigned to the 69th Bomb Squadron, and they had just come back from off the line. What the procedure was that you'd go up, squadron would go up on the line, and for a month, 2 months, and fly combat operations. And then you'd come back for a month, and you'd refit and retrain. We would practice bombing and all that stuff. And that's pretty much how I spent my time after that. I had a cousin who was a Marine in Noumea, New Caledonia, where Gardner McKay used to be in the TV series. And that was Noumea, New Cal. I went down a couple of times and visited him. He was a big Marine. He was a nice guy, really was a first-class fellow. And I used to invite him to go up on the line with me. I said, come on, you're a Marine, I want to show you all the targets and everything. We'll fly around, drop some bombs. And he'd always insist, no, they had to have him down there. He couldn't get away. They had to have him there. But he was good to me. The last time I visited him, well, he had come up to this base Tontuta where I had taken an airplane down. They were modifying the airplane. The B-25 had one little 30 caliber machine gun in the nose and a turret with two, and then two side guns. They would take them down to this modification center, and they'd put 4 forward firing 50 calibers in the nose, 4 on each, or 2 on each side made another 4. 2 on each 2 on each window in the fuselage, and then 2 in the turret. I think altogether 14 50 caliber machine guns, all capable of firing this way. So you could tear a lot of stuff up, with those. They modified them, and while they were modifying this particular airplane I had taken down to Tontuta, I went down to Noumea and visited my friend William, my cousin William. And when I left, he had come up there and found me in a little dark barracks type place. It's so hot, all you wore was a pair of shorts and a mosquito bar. You had to wear them. You had to have mosquito bars. Mosquitoes were so bad. You had to sleep under a mosquito bar every night. So he wrote home and told them that I didn't have any shoes, I didn't have this, I didn't have that. And when I left, he gave me a fifth of good whiskey, a pair of Marine Corps shoes, a cigarette lighter, a Zippo, and a mattress pad. And I was all bundled up with all this stuff put in the airplane to go home. Well, he wrote home and told them I was just destitute. And my daddy phoned the congressman and raised Cain about, well, why weren't they taking care of? Well, of course I was just down there overnight, I didn't need anything but a toothbrush. But I had a great time with him. He was a character.
What was your first combat mission?
First combat mission. It was at a place called Kolombangara. Kolombangara is an island, a cone, a conical island that rose up like a volcano, just above New Georgia Island. And we were ordered to go up there and make a low-level attack on a Japanese materiel area that had supplies of all kinds. And so we were ordered to go in and make a low-level attack with them, and we took turns going in, shooting it all up, and everything. And that was the first Japanese soldier I ever saw, was a guy getting into an anti-aircraft position. And that's when I realized that, these people are really shooting at me. I hadn't done anything to them, but they were shooting at me. So I became aware then that the war was going to be a little different than the way I had pictured it.
So where did you fly out of for that first mission?
Guadalcanal, which really wasn't very far away. You see that map, it's not really very far away.
How many aircraft were involved?
probably, I don't recall offhand, but it was a squadron attack, so it must have been 12 to a squadron. And we flew, say, like squadron strength, we'd have a flight of 6. And part of the squadron would stay over here till we made our attack, and they'd come down and make their attack in stages. It was interesting. Now, the worst mission at that time that I flew was at a place called Kahili Airdrome, which was a big Jap aircraft staging area on the northeast coast of Bougainville Island, which we pronounced Bougainville at that time. It's probably Bougainville. If you recall reading about Admiral Yamamoto, the great Japanese naval hero, well, that's where Admiral Yamamoto was shot down, at Kahili. Later, it was later than this, but we were ordered to attack Kahili because they were running aircraft down there and using them to attack our forces that were fighting on an island named Vella La Vella. And both the Japanese Army and Marines and U.S., I think the 43rd Division were fighting there. And we were supposed to suppress the air, the enemy air, keep them from attacking our troops. And we made, the first one I flew, we hit them at just dusk. We flew up the slot between the islands and the Solomons on the deck, 12 of us. And we had to go right, and just at dusk, we were there. It was well timed. We went up a little ridge and then came down 6 abreast. Two rows, 2 lines of 6 abreast, firing. Everything we had, we were firing. We had the engines on red line, and we were going as fast as we can, firing. And we were supposed to take the enemy by surprise, doing this. Of course, as soon as we got up on that ridge and started down, I tell you, dark became daylight with all the anti-aircraft, the flak. It was as light as this is. They were firing at us, we were firing at them, and of course it's over, in just a few seconds. You're past the target and gone, and we're headed toward a swamp that was to the east of the airdrome. And I remember that first we flew several missions up there, and they didn't think, actually they thought we'd have very heavy losses. It turned out we lost 1 each time we went up there. We lost 1 aircraft, and that was all. But I remembered my airplane was about in the middle of the line of the first attack, and I happened just to glance over, and there was a Japanese destroyer or cruiser in a little harbor there called Tonale Harbor. They had slipped in, and of course we didn't have any opportunity to attack it. We were in and out. We dropped our bombs, and we were using what we call parafrag bombs, parachute bombs. And as soon as they got proximate to the ground, they'd spread shrapnel everywhere to damage the aircraft. And the next time we went up, so anyway, we radioed back right away. They had this capital ship up there. Well, they left. They left right away. By that time, we were in the American forces, American and Australian and New Zealand, we were pretty much in charge of daylight up there. The Japs were good at night. We were good in daylight. Fighting, I'm talking about. Well, we went up there again, and I had a friend on the other side. His name was Spees. His whole crew cartwheeled into the swamp on fire, just like that. We only lost that 1 ship. And then we went up there again right at daylight. Just went up at night, and just as it got daylight, we went into them. Of course, the same thing happened. They were all ready for us. I don't remember, I just don't remember offhand whether we lost anybody then or not, but I'll tell you one thing, they thought our losses were going to be quite heavy.
Just tell me out here, what unit were you in at this time?
This was a 42nd Bomb Group of the 13th Air Force.
And your rank?
My rank was, well, I went over to second lieutenant, I came back a first lieutenant. They just run out, I guess they'd run out of promotions, so they gave me one.
And how old were you at this time?
Well, I was 19, well, I was 20. I was 20. I think I flew my 35th combat mission when I was 21 on my 21st birthday. Well, I was a veteran. I was a veteran then, you know. I used to check all the co-pilots out.
How long were you in the theater?
15 months in the South Pacific.
And what time period was that?
Well, it was jungle. We were called the Jungle Air Force. It was all jungle, those islands and all of that. Now, one thing that's interesting, I flew in 15 months' time. I flew 62 missions. Well, when you think about it, the weather was so bad over there, we just couldn't fly all the time, you know, it was kind of the weather. And then we were training a lot, and I went up to the big Jap base at Rabaul, and call it, in New Britain Island, north of us. And we had moved up to a place called Sterling Island, just southwest of Bougainville Island, and we flew a lot of missions up in that area, Rabaul, and all that. Rabaul had about 5 main air bases, and every time you go up there and bomb them, the Japs would repair them and all that. We pretty much controlled the daytime air. I was never attacked by an aircraft up there because we had a lot of fighter cover. You remember reading about Colonel Boyington, Pappy Boyington, the great Marine pilot? Well, when I first started going up there, Colonel Boyington's Marine group were our fighter cover. And then we had New Zealand fighters, Navy fighters, Army fighters. So we weren't really in any danger of any Japanese air attacks. We had lots of fighter cover. But we went up to Bougainville a lot because at that time, the command thought they were going to invade New Britain Island in that area. Of course, when they started the tactics of, you know, skipping the islands and all of that, they left a lot of those Japanese troops just marooned on those islands. So they were island hopping. But at that time, they thought they were going to have to take Rabaul. So I went up to Rabaul about 25 times. I was hit 16 times, 12 consecutive times. My aircraft was hit in various places, and they called me lucky. They well, put Sam over here on tail end Charlie, put Sam up here, put Sam over there, and it didn't matter. Everywhere I went, my aircraft got hit.
Describe that. What was it like when your aircraft got hit?
The flak? Well, it was loud, and there a lot of it around, bursting. You know, you'd see these blue puffs around, and a lot of the shrapnel would rattle off your wings. You could hear it. Sometimes a burst would be close enough, it'd rock the airplane, and we'd get hit. The airplane would shudder. One time I got hit right under the cockpit, and pretty good sized piece of shrapnel came up through the airplane. The seats in the cockpit ran on steel rails. You know, you'd slide them back and forth. And this big piece of shrapnel hit one of the rails, and half of it went out the side of the airplane, and half of it went up between the co-pilot and me, where my engineer usually stood. He stood up there while we were going over the target to watch the gauges and everything, and it went right up through past his nose. And I thought when it went by me, I thought I'd been hit. I felt a thud, you know, that way. And as soon as I could, gave my co-pilot the control. I slid my seat back to see how I was wounded. And it just one little, I had on a pair of long khaki trousers, and just one little faint slit on my trousers. And I didn't get the Purple Heart. I didn't get a decoration or anything. I felt cheated. I said, you know, I might even get to go home. I looked up there, wasn't anything. And I had a gunner one time, just flak shell burst just over the turret. He was in the middle turret, called top turret. And shell burst and it blew him. Now it's difficult to get into that turret, you know, with all the steel encasing you. And that shell blew up right on above him, and it blew him out of the turret. First thing he knew, he was lying on the floor with all this glass around him. He wasn't hurt. Had a few little cuts around him, but he wasn't hurt. But the concussion blew him out of that turret. You imagine that. So we had a number of things happen like that, and weather was bad. Weather was dangerous. Weather was very dangerous.
The 15 months you were there, can you tell me the dates?
Yeah, I got, let's see, I arrived I arrived in Hickam Field on May 1st, 1943, and I came back, I think, in July, so about the middle of July of 44. So it figured out 15 months, a little over 15 months. There it was.
And you turned 21 during that period.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's about turning 21.
Well, I flew a combat mission that day, and somebody had given me a quart of Australian whiskey. And I'd been saving that to celebrate my birthday with some of my friends there. And so after that mission, of course, we didn't have to fly the next day. You know, you always had at least one day between missions. So after supper that night, a couple of my friends and I got that whiskey, and one of them had freed a quart of grapefruit juice. And we got behind a coconut tree there behind the barracks and started drinking that whiskey. And we just sat there and drank whiskey, you know, and talked, you know, and celebrating my birthday. And I guess along about 2 o'clock in the morning, we decided we better go to bed, or we couldn't get up. Now, we were sober from the neck up, really, but we couldn't move. So we threw Carl on the tin roof, you know, and some guys came out, took us up the steps, and put us in bed. Well, my cot was the second from the field telephone. And along about, I guess, 7 o'clock in the morning, there I am asleep. An operations office called and said, send me down there. I was going to fly to Guadalcanal to get a load of beef for the squadron. And they had already called my engineer who was there they sent a Jeep up to get me, and they took me down. Now, I'm going to tell you something that's the truth. Now, this is the truth. They briefed me on what I was supposed to do. I was take this airplane down to Guadalcanal and pick up a load of beef and bring it back to the squadron. They had what they called salvo kits that you placed in the bomb bay, you know, a rack, and you put cargo on that. And so I took off with my engineer as my co-pilot. Flew to Guadalcanal, which is about 130 or 40 miles away. And the first thing I remembered about the whole event was I called in for landing instructions. I came to. I just came to. I won't embellish it anymore now. I just say I came to. And there I was making traffic to land at Coley Field, Guadalcanal. It happened, and now that's the truth. I didn't really remember anything about anything else, and my engineer said, you fly pretty good. I've been on a toot all night. And I said, well, thank you. Maybe I ought to do it every night, There was a man in Tuscaloosa named Omar Fawcett. I'm sure you remember the Fawcetts. Omar was a captain there, and he had an engineer company that had their whole outfit on the coast there at Coley Point on Guadalcanal. And I happened to know he was down there. So I called him, and he took a car, brought a car over there and got me and took me back to eat lunch with them. Had a nice mess right there on the ocean, right? A beautiful place and just an idyllic South Sea view. And by that time, we're getting pretty good food over there. They had a lot of good food. I had a great lunch. So I told him, I said, let's go back, and if they haven't loaded my beef, I'll take you for a ride. Well, they had not. So I took off and flew local around Guadalcanal and let him fly. I gave him the controls, and he just steered the airplane around, and having a great, he'd never been in an airplane before. So we had a great time. Well, I did that with him for about an hour and then took him back. By that time, they had the beef down there, and I loaded up and went back. And Omar never forgot that. And he was always grateful to me for taking him on that ride.
You said you flew 62 missions. Can you walk us through what a day that you were flying was like? How did the mission?
Well, after the first introduction to combat flying, when I first got over there, we were at Guadalcanal and a place called Russell Islands, north of Guadalcanal. We would, if you were assigned, you had a ready roster there on the bulletin board. You'd go see if you were going to fly, and what the target was going to be like, and all of that. And if we were flying medium altitude missions, like 10,000 feet, doing bombing at 10,000 feet, it was fairly routine. We'd take off. They were mostly timed missions. I remember we went up to Guadalcanal the last tour I was up there. We bombed Rabaul every day at noon. We went over the target at noon every day. And at that time, I was flying every other day. And it was just what we would call just a normal day. We'd go out with a crew on a truck. I always had I made a point of taking my maps and getting down and showing the crew where we were going, what route we were taking, and about where to start. We'd have to load your guns, charge your guns, and I'd tell them, when we get to this point, here, you see that, then go ahead and charge your guns without waiting for me to tell you to do it. And then we would fly up. Many of these missions were squadron missions. You had 12 B-25s in flights of 3. That'd be like 3 here, 3 here, 3 here, maybe 3 over here. We'd fly. And then we'd get in. When we would get in position to make the attack, we would attack more or less in a line, a step down, so you could see the flight ahead of it, but you step down through flights of 3. And we would turn into the target and maybe be over the target 2 or 3 minutes, which is a long time. We had your bomb bay doors are open and everything's ready, everybody looking on. And when we first, for example, we did that exact thing. We first started bombing Rabaul. Rabaul was a very hot target. A lot of Japanese there, a lot of anti-aircraft there. So when you got near the target, you started getting flak. And we devised a system, because they were good, Japanese were very good at that. And we devised a system. We would turn into the target and count 10 seconds, and then we would bank. Everybody would bank over. And of course, as soon as we banked, the position we had been occupying blew up with flag. We would just dodge them, and then we'd come back, and they would explode over here. Now, we bombed them so much they didn't have a whole lot left toward the latter part of that campaign. But for a long time, we had to be careful about dodging the flag. But you'd barrel in. You had to stop and maintain your position and your altitude for several minutes in order to get the bombs on the target. And then, we'd retire. They had these little what they call canteens, like we had at scout camp. And they'd sell candy, and they had these Perfecto cigars, whatever, the really fine Dutch Masters cigars, this long. So I would buy, because I was smoking, I'd been smoking since I was 15, I'd buy some of those cigars, and when I pulled the wheels up going to the target, I'd light one of those cigars. And I could smoke that cigar all the way to the target, and I'd put it out. I didn't just smoke them, I inhaled them. Then when we turned around and retired from the target, I'd light another one, and I'd smoke it all the way down to our home base, and put it out before we landed. But that was my habit. That was one of my habits. We did some low level at one stage of the game. The Solomon Islands there's a slot of sea between them called the slot. And these islands are stretched all over the place like this. At one time, we would go up, we had a lot of Japanese shipping in the northern Solomons, and they operated at night. And they operated barges and minesweepers, and destroyers and things like that around. And we would go up to a place called Munda, which was a big American base up above Guadalcanal, and we'd go up there and spend the night. Because what the tactics were, they'd have these Dumbos, these PBM-3 seaplanes, call them Dumbos, scout planes. And the Dumbos would patrol the area, and when they came up on phosphorescence in the water, in the sea, they knew it was a ship. Well, nobody up there but Jap. So they'd fly up that phosphorescent glow to identify the position of that ship. And they'd radio back to Munda. Then we would take off and go up there and try to bomb the ship. They'd give us a position, and all that, and try to vector us in on the ship. I went up there several times doing that. Now that was weird. I was hoping I never would. I never did have to go. I never did have to go on one of those. But we were ready to go. Ready to go. Just wake us up, send us down there. But that was one of the things they did to control the Japanese shipping. As a matter of fact, there's a story about one of our squadrons in our group, the 390th Squadron, and it was this. There was a line of demarcation up in the Solomons, and everything above that line was Japanese, and everything below it was American. So if you caught anything above the line, it was enemy. So you attacked it. Well, the 390th had a flight of 3 B-25s up there early one morning. We operated a lot of Jack Kennedy's PT boats up there. And they would go up at night, shoot up barges and shell the coast and, whatever. And one of them was late, getting back south of the line of demarcation. And so these B-29 aircraft spotted up there. Well, the Japanese had boats very similar to ours, so they peeled off and attacked this PT boat. They sank a PT boat, And one of the other PT boats shot down a B-25 out of 390th bomb squad, and they all shaking their fists at one another. But that could happen very easily, you know, in that area, because it's very weird kind of war anyway, you know. But that actually happened. There's a story.
What was your time off like?
Well, they had a magazine, some old books. You know, I read a number of books over there, War and Peace and things like that. And people from home would send me the Tuscaloosa News, and of course they'd all come. I'd have maybe 25 papers, you know, that I'd sit there and read. And a lot of the fellows played poker. I played a lot of gin rummy and casino, and I didn't know how to play poker, and I was too lazy to learn how. I guess I should have. I had the time. I could have learned to play bridge, you know, and just sitting around there. And just kind of make do. And I slept a lot, you know. It was humid and hot. Because if you were raised in Alabama, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the jungles didn't really upset me too much. It was the mosquitoes, you know, and things like that, the bugs and all that. But so far as the temperature and climate and all is concerned, that didn't bother me too much. We had a number of people who didn't fare well with it, but it didn't bother me a whole lot. Now, we didn't have a lot of good food at first, and I was 150 pounds solid when I went overseas, and I was 127 pounds when I came back. So the food, the climate, the boredom, and all of that, everybody lost weight. You know, it was like that. Then we had, particularly at one or two times, they had a movie every night, and they had these old little steel seats out of old bomb fins that they had made, and you'd sit there and you could play casino or blackjack or something until the movie came on. They have some old movie like old Philo Vance and some old dumb movie. You know, they weren't first-rate pictures, but they were pictures. So we'd go every night if we weren't doing anything else, go down and watch the movie. And then some of the places where we went, you would, like we flew a mission, we got back, we ate, we took a shower, took a nap, and then we'd go down and swim. And you could sit there on the coral rock on some of those islands and watch the sun go down. It had a big orange orb filled up the sky down there, and it would hover on the horizon and just stop, and all of a sudden, plop, go down like that. It was beautiful, beautiful to watch it. And that's really about all we did. Didn't have anything. There was a fellow at my last tour up there on Sterling Island. There was a squadron that joined our group called the 100th Bomb, which had been the old 107th Air National Guard Squadron of Birmingham. And one of the fellows who was a cook in the mess hall was a fellow from Tuscaloosa named Fred Barringer. A lot of Barringers from around Gordo, Elrod, that area. And Fred, who's a great big hulking guy, that's the nicest guy you ever would meet, his nickname was Gorilla. Well, I used to run into people I had known, okay, go to the island. And so I ran into Gorilla. Well, Gorilla found out that my favorite dessert was chocolate pie. So I'd be down in the back. We slept at that time in these Quonset huts. It must have been probably 30, 40 people in Quonset huts, we just all crammed in there, but at least we had a roof over our head and had a cot. And Fred would call on the field telephone, tell them that somebody wanted to see me up so-and-so. And I would walk through the jungle at night, no light, no anything. I'd walk up through the jungle to the mess hall, and he'd have me a chocolate pie, and I'd eat the whole thing. And occasionally, when they got a load of beef in their squadron, he would slip me back a steak. They ate well. The cooks always got first choice on everything. And every now and then he'd fix me a steak and call up, and I'd go, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I would go up there and eat that steak. He was really good to me, really good to me. And that was one of the occasional things that I did. And we did a lot of local flying. You had to put time, break the engines in, you know, and we called it slow timing. So we'd take off and fly around, slow time the aircraft. Sometimes, one time we had a Liberty ship that came in at a little harbor they had on the other side of our island. And some of the young officers came over and wanted to fly, you know. Oh, sure. We were drilling then, we were practicing. And we'd take them down and we'd skip bomb these skip bomb some little target there. And oh, they just thought that was wonderful. It was all business with us, you know. They thought it was fun. Oh, this is great. Well, they invited us over for dinner to their ship. So we got a Jeep, about maybe a half a dozen of us who had given them rides and all that. We rode through the jungle, this little old trail going up, found this ship and went in. Listen, it was like dying and going to heaven. They had linen tablecloths, you know, and they had a couple of stewards there. They had good whiskey. They offered us drinks. We had wine, and maybe we had beef or something like that. But it was great. It was a great evening out for us. And then on an average of about every 4 months, they'd get us together and fly us to Auckland, New Zealand, to get out of the heat, you know, our R&R. And the Army really did, I mean, they really tried. The Army really, I give my hat is off to them. They really tried to take care of us. We'd get in there one day. They took you to an armed forces building and they gave you a freshly cleaned and pressed OD uniform, shirt, you know, those old OD, whatever they called them, wool worsted uniforms. And you could go every day and get a fresh one. Didn't cost you anything. But you paid £5. They'd give you a payday then. They'd give you take £5 and belong to the club. That entitled you to the uniform every day and a whiskey ration twice a week. They rationed the whiskey on Monday and Thursday. Now, if you got there on Sunday or Wednesday, you got one right away, and then you go back and get another one. And the whiskey ration consisted. Now, here I was a kid, 20 years old. I didn't drink any, you know, I didn't know how to drink anything. But we would have occasional drink. I didn't know how to drink much, and but that's one of the things. And they gave you a bottle of bottled in bond bourbon, and either VO, gin, brandy, or rum to make up the 2 bottles. I had a navigator named Albert Paris McLean, one of the greatest guys you ever would know, just a prince of a guy from Denver, Colorado. And McLean and I saved up our liquor. We went back down to New Zealand. We didn't drink much anyway. We were flying. You couldn't drink a whole lot anyway. We went back to Auckland with 2 full cases, Bombardier cases of booze. And we didn't have, you know, we didn't know anybody down there, didn't know what to do. We went around, we went horseback riding, or we walked around the streets and all. Well, they had an overnight train that went to Wellington, New Zealand. So several of us, there must have been about 4 or 5 of us, said, well, let's just go to Wellington. Now, we were down in 9 days, so we could plan whatever we wanted to do. So we got on the train at Auckland about 6 o'clock one evening. And of course, you had to take our booze with us. And we got the whole train drunk. There were 2 passenger cars, mostly men. In those British countries, as you know, on a train, they stop every 15 minutes and run off and get hot tea at some little rinky-dink station. They'd go out there, scalding tea. You couldn't drink it, but run out and get tea and bring it back. So we got the conductor to get us a table, and we put all this booze, bourbon, scotch, every gin, and we invited everybody to come have a drink. And those guys stayed up all night long. We had the whole 2 cars drunk. So we got to Wellington and got a taxi that take us to a hotel. Well, it took us to this hotel. And we went in. It was a nice little hotel. I've forgotten the name of it, but it had 2 older women who were running the office, check-in and clerks and all that. Now, the U.S. Marines had been in Wellington before they made the invasion of Guadalcanal some time ago, and they really liked Americans. The New Zealanders really liked Americans. I mean, we had bailed them out. So I went up to the desk and I asked the lady, I said, we have these people here and we're just here for a couple of days. We've come down from the islands and we just want to look around. Do you have any place you could put us? Oh, exactly. They gave us the biggest suite in the hotel. The lady says, now you have your meals at the captain's table. So every meal we had there, we had the captain's, the owner's table, And always had 2 waiters coming up, waiting on us. And they were very nice to us. Well, I went down to find out about something after we checked in. And one of the ladies says, now my daughter, Beatty, will be very happy to take you around Wellington. She is a student in Wellington University. Beatty Coltman was her name, C-O-L-T-M-A-N. It's a lovely girl. She was blonde. And she had a friend named Mara Griffith, whose husband was a prisoner of the Japanese in Singapore. She had heard from him in Singapore. Those girls took us to a couple of plays. They spent all their meat coupons making hamburgers for us. Took us somewhere, I've forgotten now where else it was, but for the 3 days we were there, they want to know what can we do? Where would you like to go? Where would you like to eat? So on. So just really lovely girls. And I had their addresses for a long time and I've lost them, but they were really charming to us. So that was one of the things. And we went back. I don't think we got to the next train going back to Auckland drunk. I think we were pretty tired out from all that. But well, that's the kind of thing we did.
I understand you also used some creative ways of procuring beer for your guys.
Well, I can't think of any offhand. You have a lot of experiences like that. We went to, we came back from one of those New Zealand trips, and we came back on a naval ship, a naval airplane. I think it was a Mariner, Martin Mariner. They had a galley on it, and they cooked us little steaks on it. And we got back, they had billeted us in pyramidal tents out somewhere out in the boonies. I mean, we had to spend the night there. We didn't have anything, didn't have food, we had cots there, we had to spend the night there. And one of the guys who was with us had been an embalmer in Bolivar, New York. And he had gone to embalming school in Cleveland. Now here it's pitch black dark in this tent. Pitch black dark. You couldn't see your hand in front of you. And he began to tell us about the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Row, a killer who had preyed on all kinds of people and he never caught him. And he went from one to the other. And he said, as soon as the war came along, those murders stopped. And you could hear people clicking their 45s, and don't anybody come near my cot. It was really kind of a frightening story. We stayed in that till the next morning, and we went out. We had a guy in the squadron named Capes, and his nickname was Wheels, because Capes would always get transportation. No matter where he wanted to go, he would find some way to get transportation. And while we were down there at that place, he went to a telephone and he called the motor pool and he said, "This is Lieutenant Cates, General Jones's aide." There wasn't any General Jones. "Yes, sir, Lieutenant," says, "the General is here at certain place and wishes to go so-and-so." "Yes, sir, we'll have a car right there." Well, here comes the command car, and Capes, I was with Capes, and Capes says, "The General had to go on, but he told me to meet him at so-and-so, so take us on." "Yes, sir." So that was Capes. And he flew with a guy named Albert Horn. This is the kind of thing that we regaled ourselves with. Albert Horn had a big snarl, so we called him the Horn. Well, Capes and the Horn were very eccentric people, and nobody wanted to fly with either one of them. So they scheduled them together. And when they would fly, now I mean, this was on combat missions and all of that. If one or the other wanted to adjust the throttles, the other one would slap his hand and say, "I'll take care of those. Keep your hands on that." Can you believe that? This was in the South Pacific during the war. That actually happened. Oh, we had a kleptomaniac in the squadron. And we had a West Point graduate, a lieutenant colonel, who came up with a very bright idea when we were doing these bad missions up at Kahili. And he said, "Now, the way to get the Japanese Air Force out of this war is we'll fly up to Kahili and drop tacks. And that will puncture all the tires on the Japanese planes and they won't be able to fly." And they sent him home. They sent that guy home. He was a nut.
Speaking of going home, how did your tour end?
Well, I had flown a combat mission up to Rabaul, and I think I had been to the mess hall, several of us, we'd been to the mess hall and we'd eaten. I was walking down the company street there, and the flight surgeon, "Sambo, come over here a minute." So I walked over and he says, "You're grounded." I said, "What do you mean I'm grounded?" "You're going home." There was a new regulation that allowed a flight surgeon to take people who had a lot of time and combat missions to send them home. So he says, "I'm going to send you home." I said, "Fine." So I had to wait several weeks for in fact, I had to fly up to, this is an interesting story. I had to fly up to a place, an island above New Guinea, where the American forces had just moved in there. But now, see, my base, the Japanese in New Guinea were between us. And I had to fly over with this colonel, and I took an airplane to go up there and see if our orders were up there. Because that's where the 13th Air Force headquarters was supposed to be moving. Well, it turned out they hadn't moved up there yet. We had taken this airplane up there. Well, I was in the operations room, and lo and behold, I looked up, and here was this man, this full colonel at the desk, whom I had known as a first lieutenant in Tuscaloosa. He was a CO of the Air Corps detachment at Van de Graaff Air Force Base when they were training cadets there. His name was Pinky Burnham. His nickname was Pinky. He was a West Point graduate and all that, Nice looking fella, great big impressive looking officer. And they had lived in an apartment next door to our home in Audubon Place. Well, I just went up there and I said, "Colonel Burnham, I don't know that you remember me, but I'm Sam Beatty from Tuscaloosa." "Sammy, of course I remember you." I swear to God, "Of course I remember you. How are you? What are you doing over here?" And I said, "Well, Colonel, I've been in the 42nd Bomb Group." I told him, and all that. I said, "Colonel Eklund, my CO and I are up here looking for our orders, and it looks like we're going to have to fly to Brisbane to find them." He says, well, I'm going to Brisbane tomorrow. I'd be more than happy to have you go with us. He was group commander of a B-24 group there. And we flew down with him, took a 9-hour flight from there to Brisbane. They had us over to dinner that night. They stayed in a nice hotel. And I was bivouacked in some place downtown in Brisbane. Well, Colonel Eklund found our orders, and I had to stay there 4 or 5 days to finally get them and all that. And they gave both of us a number 2 airplane priority. And we flew from Brisbane back to Honolulu, and then I got bumped to maybe half a day, and then they flew me back to Hamilton Field. Well, now they knew how to handle that too, buddy. They knew how to handle it. I had money, I had orders, I had an airplane ticket all ready the very next morning when I was ready to leave there. So that's how I got back to the States. And when that airplane landed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I got down on that concrete runway and kissed it. I was that glad to get back.
So what'd you do when
They put me on,
It just sounded like it was about to
oh,
go.
okay. That okay?
Yep.
They gave me 30 days leave. You had 30 days leave. And I went crow hunting and went down to Utah and bought cold, warm beer and drank beer at home. And, wasn't anything to do, wasn't anybody there. And then I went to Miami Beach. The Air Force had taken over some beach hotels down there, and I had two other fellas and I had a nice second floor suite right there on the beach in Miami Beach. And I just didn't do anything but eat and drink beer and walk around, visit the shops. We went up the beach, found a restaurant, an Italian restaurant up the beach, and I walked in, and there was a guy I had sold magazines for in Tuscaloosa. And I said, I know you don't remember me. His name was Ralph Satterfield. And, well, Sammy, how you doing? Sammy, so good. So we enjoyed we had a good bottle of wine and a good food, whatever it was. And he says, it's on the house. Anytime you come up here, it's on the house. And of course, we never went back, but he was very kind. When I stayed there, I was there about 6 weeks, 6 or 7 weeks in Miami.
What's the purpose of the Miami Beach?
Fatten you up, get you ready for the kill again. Everybody who came out had some degree of what they call operational fatigue. You're just worn out. You're down. You needed, you needed to get yourself re-geared, and they were good. They were good at that. I could have stayed. I mean, we had an inspection every Friday morning. These MDs would come by. How are you feeling and all that, and. So I was tired of that. I didn't like that. I was ready to go back, start flying again. So I figured out what to do. They came in one Friday morning and said, well, how are you feeling, Lieutenant? And I said, I really like it here, sir. I'm doing real well. I really like it here. I've made some friends here in Miami, and I'm just doing fine. Well, I had orders Sunday to get out. That was the catch-22 that I had. So then I went, I wrangled an assignment to Columbus Air Force Base. And, but it was small. They weren't flying what I wanted to fly. I didn't have a car. You didn't go anywhere. It was just nothing. So I got in touch with my contact, who was an officer in the headquarters at Fort Worth. And I said, this won't do. So get me sent to a B-25 field. So they sent me to Turner Air Force Base in Albany, Georgia, and I stayed there about 9 months. It was a B-25 advanced training base. I really liked that. I passed up a promotion. They were going to promote me to captain and make me engineering officer at Columbus. I said, thank you. sir, if it's all the same to you, I'm just a B-25 pilot. I'm not going to stay in the Army, so if it just let me go. So they let me go. So that was how that happened. So I met a lot of nice local people in Albany. I had several friends, several Catholic friends who knew some Catholic lay people in Albany, and developed a lot of good friendships that way. I still keep up with this family, incidentally. You know Bob's Candy, Bob's Peppermint Candy, Bob Candy, a big outfit. Somebody just bought it. They owned Bob's Candy Company. They were just the most wonderful people you ever would meet. And every Sunday night, our gang went there for supper, Sunday night supper. We'd make homemade ice cream, and they were just wonderful people to us. We had a great time. One of my good friends was the Catholic chaplain there, Father Roche, Val Roche. He was a really nice guy. But they didn't try to proselyte me or anything, you understand.
Did you fly back toward Tuscaloosa? Ever come back to Tuscaloosa?
Oh, yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, I buzzed Tuscaloosa once. I was stationed that was the last day I flew for the Army. I was being separated at Fort McPherson, Atlanta, and I caught a ride in the caboose of a freight train. I talked the freight conductor into letting me ride in a caboose to Albany. They were going to Albany, and he said, "You keep the manifest, and you stay here in the caboose." I said, "Fine." So I got a ride down, and the next day I went out to the base. I got a room in the BOQ, and the next day I went down to my old squadron, and I said, I'm on separation orders, but I'm still active, and I need to fly at least 4 hours to get my flying time. Because I got paid half again for flying pay. Oh, sure. So they had a couple of cadets they wanted to take to, anyway, we flew to like Jackson, Mississippi, and then back up. And when we got to Tuscaloosa, I said, "I want to show you guys something you should never do." And then I put a real buzz job on Tuscaloosa. I flew all over the city of Tuscaloosa, about 20 feet high, just high enough for the tree.
Go?
What?
Where'd you go?
Oh, I went up and down Broad Street, Greensboro Avenue, the University, Audubon Place. Anyway I wanted, and I buzzed down. And my sister and my mother were standing out on the front porch. My sister said, "I know that's not Sam Beatty. He's got more sense than that." I just buzzed on. So I had to fly up to Birmingham, and then I flew on down to Turner. And as soon as I got there, I went in operation and filed a buzz report. You all right if you reported that you had buzzed a town for one thing and another? That was okay. If you didn't report it and somebody turned your number in, they dock your pay. They do that. But I had a great time at Turner. I was flying what I liked and enjoyed the duty, and I had a number of friends there. And then I came back. When I got out, I came on back to Tuscaloosa, and that was in July, I guess, and I was just waiting for school to start. So I started school in the fall semester.
Oh, what year?
45. And I graduated. I finally got my undergraduate degree in spring of 48. And I got a job. I was veteran service officer for the county. So Apple and I married, and I wasn't getting anywhere. So I walked in one day, and I said, "Apple, you better get a job because I'm going to law school." So I enrolled in law school. Well, I had all a GI Bill. I had GI Bill scholarship. They paid me money. They paid my fees. They bought my books. So, and I got a part-time job after my first law school year. I was working at a part-time job. And so I got out in law school in 53, in the winter of 53. But see, I started law school in 50, right at the time the Korean conflict began. And I thought, uh-oh, I better do something about my military status. So Apple and I got in a car and drove to Warner Robins, Georgia, where the big reserve area was. And they gave me back my commission. They gave me a physical exam, swore me in, there I was. So then they told me you got to elect. You cannot have a military specialty as a pilot and one as a lawyer. And you're in law school. What are you going to do? And I said, I'd rather be a lawyer. So I went on through school. It took me 2.5 years. I went on through school. That was it. So I had a right interest. Let me tell you something about something I've thought about a lot. Now, I ran into a number of people just like you guys have. Some are good, some are qualified, and some are dumb, and so on. I ran into a lot of that in the military. Some people were just good leaders, and some people were just there. But the marvel of my military experience is this. When we started gearing up for World War II, we didn't have an army as big as the Bulgarian army. I mean, I went on National Guard maneuvers in the summer of 1940, and we cut logs and put 50 caliber on it, painted 50 caliber, and used those for machine guns. I mean, we didn't have anything. And whoever did it, the Air Force, I suppose, whoever did it, developed these tests that could really predict who could do what. And that's how we got started. I mean, people who were mechanics, photographers, so-and-so, clerks, pilots, navigators, bombers, they could tell from those tests what people were qualified to do. And that, to me, above everything else, was the marvel of the United States of America in World War II, that we were able to do that. We went from nothing. We went from less than 200,000 people in the whole United States Army to millions of people in a short period of time. They knew how to train us and all of that. And to me, that's marvelous. It's really a miracle. I just don't see how we did it.
That's great.
It was wonderful. I mean, it was an experience. It was an experience. And above all, my military experience, I had many really good, close friends, really good people who were in the military, just like I did law students. The best friends I have in life are former students of mine. And it just gave me that experience that if the war hadn't come along and I'd stayed in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, I'd be pumping gas somewhere or something, and I never would have known anybody else, you see. But what a wonderful experience, that, as terrible as the war was, what a wonderful experience it was for me.
Good. Very good.
Okay.
Is there anything you really wanted to say? That was a great close. Anything else that you wanted to say? We've forgotten to go over?
Wiley Sanders bought a B-25 and had it refurbished. This is his airplane. And a friend of mine gave this to me. But it's the same airplane that we flew during the war. It's a great airplane. And now the only trouble with it is you can't, an average person couldn't afford to fly this kind of airplane. It's, the upkeep's too expensive. Gasoline and oil and all of that is way too expensive. But he flies it around. And as I say, a friend of mine gave it to me and I had it framed. And
So that's the restored plane.
What?
That's his restored plane?
Yeah. But I kept this. I discovered I had this. I didn't know whether I was supposed to have it or not, but all the points where we flew in the Northern Solomons are on here. Now we had other operations
Why don't
north.
you sit in the chair and tell me how that worked? I mean, if you're flying, did you have that like in front of you or something?
Oh yeah,
How did that work?
Well, you just pull it out of your pocket. Like if I was up here and I didn't know exactly where I was or how far I was from the base here at Guadalcanal. I just look on this strip map, say, well, here I am over at Soisel, so I know what course to take. Or if we'd been on a mission, there's Colombangara where I flew my first mission here. If I was there, I knew the course that I could fly back. And that was great when the weather was fine, but when the weather fouled up, weather over there is the worst in the world. It's the worst in the world. And we had people lost. I mean, just got lost because of weather. Never did show up, that kind of thing. But I wanted to keep this. It helped me. It helped me a great deal. Now, are we through?
She got her undergraduate degree in Princeton in aerospace engineering, got her master's at Washington University in St. Louis, and she thought she was going to stay at WashU to get her doctorate, but she did the summer program in Albuquerque at Kirtland Air Force Base in the space
That's great.
Vehicles Directorate or whatever it is. Yeah, their satellite space station.
Okay, and yes, if that's okay, if you don't mind. And we'll do exactly the same thing. Just maybe if you want to point out where your main base was.
Well, yeah, it was right here.
Expertise you need for research goes beyond instrumentation.
Okay.
So she's staying with the Air Force, working for the Air Force until Christmas, and then she's probably going to end up in Texas. I think that's where they want her to go for her doctorate. So that's
Alrighty. And then I can only assume that handsome fellow in that picture is you.
Yeah. Yeah, those were the days, all right.
All right.
As a matter of fact, that was a brand new shirt. I had this picture taken.
Remembers that long ago.
Brand new shirt, huh?